In today's video, we're going to continue our 2019 NHL offseason plan series, and we're taking a look at the Winnipeg Jets. And that's coming up next. Welcome back to Top Shelf Hockey. If you're new to the channel, thanks for stopping by. We review and discuss all 31 NHL teams, so if you're a huge hockey fan, consider subscribing and clicking the bell so you don't miss anything. So welcome back to the 2019 NHL offseason plan series. If you're new to this series, we basically break these videos down into three segments. Segment 1, we're going to take a look at the 18-19 season, do a recap on how the team did, take a look at some key team and player statistics, and really analyze where things are at. In the second segment, we're going to take a look at their overall salary cap situation, any pending UFAs and RFAs they need to look after this summer, and see how things sit in that regard. And then in the third and final segment, we're going to take a look at what this team needs to do to improve and get better for next season. Now, in case you missed any of our prior videos in this series, I will link the YouTube playlist up here in the YouTube cards for you to check out. We're about 2/3 of the way through the NHL now. If your team hasn't been covered yet, stay tuned. They will be coming soon here over the next coming days as we try to complete this series. Now let's jump in with an 18-19 season recap for the Winnipeg Jets. Now, as you can see, the Winnipeg Jets finished here with a 47-30-5 record for 99 points. They finished in second place in the Central Division, ended up losing in round 1, though, to the upstart St. Louis Blues, who we now find themselves in the Stanley Cup Finals. It was a hard-fought series, and the Blues certainly deserved to win. But overall, the Winnipeg Jets certainly took a little bit of a step backwards this year after going all the way to the conference finals last year. They certainly had fewer regular season points and ended up losing in round 1 instead of round 3. So overall, the Winnipeg Jets were kind of disappointed, I think, with how things went for the season. Now let's take a look at some of the key team metrics for the year, including special teams and goals for and against. Their power play was excellent all year long with a 24.8 success rate, fourth best in the NHL, so that certainly was going at a good rate here. Nothing wrong with that. The PK, though, on the other hand, wasn't great. It wasn't horrible either. 79.2% for 22nd best. That could stand to improve a little bit. Goals for was certainly pretty strong too. 272 goals for, 7th highest scoring team in the league. Goals against was 244 for 15th best, so about middle of the pack. So I'm sure they wouldn't mind improving on that a little bit here as well. Now, as far as any significant trades or other things that happened to this team throughout the year, again, for the most part, they kind of went status quo for most of the year. Of course, they had their injuries like everybody else. And of course, at the NHL Trade deadline, they once again had to go out and try to find themselves a number 2 center iceman, acquiring Kevin Hayes. Overall, that experiment didn't go too bad, but I think it's fair to say the year before, when they acquired Paul Stastny, that worked out even better. He seemed to have a little bit more better chemistry with the wingers he was playing with, as opposed to Hayes. I wouldn't say it was a complete bust, but considering the team didn't get further along and accomplish anything more than it did the year before, overall, I do think it wasn't a great attempt here to move forward. Now let's take a look at some of their top individual stats, including some goaltending and top scorers. Now, Connor Hellebuyck didn't have the best year. It wasn't terrible either, but certainly based on the standards he set the year before, certainly had a little bit of a dip in his play for sure. He finished with a 34-23-3 record, a .913 save percentage, and a 2.9 goals against average. Those numbers for a starting goaltender to get your team into hopefully a division lead and into a high-ranking spot for the playoffs, just not good enough. Connor Hellebuyck is capable of better than that. He showed that the year before, and obviously with a new contract being in place last season, it's certainly disappointing numbers to say the least. Now taking a look at some of their top scorers, of course, Captain Blake Wheeler led the way again with 91 points. Mark Scheifele finished with 84 points. Of course, Scheifele and Wheeler are one of the best 1-2 combos in the NHL. They certainly have great chemistry. Up next was youngster Kyle Connor, who's a pending RFA looking for a big raise this summer. He's at 66 points, followed by Patrick Laine, who's in the same boat. A 30-goal season, which is kind of down for him. Overall, 50 points. I think Patrick Laine was proven this year that he's really, really streaky, which we already knew, but he's never really gone streaky in the cold sense as much as he did this past season. 30 goals for a guy who's capable of 40 plus. Certainly a little bit of a disappointment. I know many people, myself included, predicted he would win the Rocket Richard Trophy this year, and he certainly came well short of that. And of course, rounding out their top scorers was defenseman Jacob Trouba, another RFA who had a 50-point season on the blue line, which was a pretty solid year for him. Now let's jump over to segment 2, where we take a look at their pending UFAs, RFAs, and their overall salary cap situation. Now this team is going to have a lot of decisions to make this year. They have a lot of players that don't have contracts, a lot of RFAs, and a lot of UFAs, and I do have a feeling that there's quite a possibility this team could look a fair bit different next year, hopefully retaining most of its core pieces. They could be in store for some significant changes though. On the RFA list, there's some big-time players that need some big-time raises, and they're going to have a difficult time getting everybody satisfied under the cap here and rounding out the roster. Patrick Laine leads the way. The former number 2 overall draft choice from a few years back has certainly earned himself a big raise, putting up some terrific goal totals during his brief NHL career. Of course, this past year was a down year, and I'm sure the Jets likely will try to take advantage of that, maybe convince him to take a shorter-term contract and kind of reprove himself to get back to the higher totals, which he can cash in on a better contract maybe in a few years' time. So I can see the strong possibility that maybe Laine looks at maybe a 3 or 4 year contract. That certainly would not surprise me. They could go longer term, but I think it'd be in Laine's best interest really not to go too long here and kind of assert himself as a perennial scorer in the league and kind of get back to those ways of scoring 40 plus goals and then cash in at a later time. Now, of course, Kyle Connor is in the same boat. He's got back-to-back 30-goal seasons, played really, really well the last couple of years with Wheeler and Scheifele, mostly on that top line, and I think he's going to be in store for a major raise as well. Of course, you get RFA defenseman Jacob Trouba. That's certainly going to be an iffy situation. Trouba is a player who they've had a hard time negotiating with and very well could find himself out of town, which we'll talk a little bit further about in the next segment. Of course, they've also got Andrew Kopp, who's been an important bottom 6 forward for them. That likely shouldn't be too difficult to retain. They've also got a couple defensemen in Joe Morrow and Nathan Beaulieu. On the unrestricted free agent list, we've got Kevin Hayes, who they spent a fair bit to get at the NHL trade deadline. It's highly unlikely they would have the money to sign him, but certainly a player who didn't really work out the best with them. Like I said, I liked the Paul Stastny trade the year before better than the Hayes deal. It didn't quite mesh. I mean, he is a player that going into it I thought would be a good fit, and it's not that it was a terrible fit. It just wasn't quite perfect, and it wasn't exactly what they needed. They've also got some key defensemen like Tyler Myers and Ben Sherratt. It's going to be hard to retain all these guys, but their decor especially could look very different next year given all the contract expirations here. They've also got Bogdan Kislevic, who they acquired previously from the Panthers. He's a pending UFA. It's probably doubtful that he returns. Forward Brandon Tanev has been very, very valuable to them in the bottom 6. He's a really good energy guy. He can play physical, can play the PK. I'd like to see them find a way to retain him. Overall, he's been pretty important to them, so we'll see how that goes. And they've also got forwards Per Lindholm and Matt Hendricks, both of which I'd say debatable whether or not they return. They were both kind of used as spare parts, and I'm not really sure that either of them have a future with the Jets. Now, looking at the overall salary cap situation right now for next year, they have 14 contracts in place for a total of $57.6 million, which leaves them $25.3 in space, assuming we get an $83 million salary cap next year, which might sound like a lot, but when you think about the amount of money it's going to take to sign Laine and Connor, for example, or even have a shot at retaining any of their defensemen, that's going to go rather quick. They also just recently signed, in the past couple days, backup goalie Laurent Brossoit to a 1-year deal, just over $1 million as well. So he would have been on this list too, but that has already been taken care of. Now, what do the Winnipeg Jets need to do to get better for next year and take that next step? I mean, from 2 seasons ago, they were in the conference finals, looking like they were a Stanley Cup contender. This past year, many people, myself included, pegged them to be a Stanley Cup contender and possibly even win it, and they fell short in the first round. Now, of course, we saw a trend this year, which was a little bit unusual. All division winners and many of these top teams that were expected to compete for the Cup, of course, not all of them, but many of them went down early in the first round. So obviously, it wasn't a big shock to see the Blues come back and overcome the Winnipeg Jets in round 1. Obviously, the Blues were the hottest team in the second half of the NHL season, even though they finished lower in the standings. That obviously does not mean a lot in today's NHL, especially when you get into the playoffs. It really is true when they say anything can happen and anybody can win. Step 1, they need a major bounce-back season here from goalie Connor Hellebuyck. He was a Vezina nominee the year before, had a fantastic year, got his new contract, and then his numbers certainly took a major dip last year. So we do need Hellebuyck to bounce back to help move this team forward. If you don't have that solid goaltender in the net, it's going to lose a lot of confidence in your team, and it's really going to have a major impact overall on everybody else. Obviously, allowing almost 3 goals a game was not good enough. His save percentage is not good enough either. He needs to get that back over 920, get the goals against down at least under 2.5, if not better. And so they really need Hellebuyck to bounce back and be that goalie he was the year before. And they really need to find themselves a number 2 center iceman and get that solidified longer term. They can't keep making these trades every year at the trade deadline, giving up their first round pick or mortgaging the future because they can't go into the playoffs without a solid top six, and they're always missing that one piece. Obviously, they have their guys like Laine and Connor that need to be signed, and those are paramount deals to get done, but they really need another forward to kind of fit in the mix there to make all of that happen. Obviously, there's been lots of trade rumors around this team as well. Who are they going to keep? Who are they going to bring back? I mean, guys like Nick Ehlers has had his name mentioned in trade rumors because of the lack of production. He struggled at times. He's yet to score a playoff goal the last 2 years. You got Jacob Trouba, who certainly is a great defenseman, has really developed quite nicely, but has really proven difficult to negotiate with, has shown some hesitation to sign long-term in Winnipeg, and now he might be asking for too much money that they can actually justify paying him and might not be able to afford to get it done. So Jacob Trouba very likely could find himself moved out of here as well. Hopefully in return, it'd be nice if they do trade Trouba, maybe they could get themselves a number 2 center iceman with an affordable contract that would work well with some of their younger wingers and really solidify that top six. If they have to trade a guy like Trouba, they need to get some value in return. They can't mess that up. Like, for example, we talked about before the potential trade between the Jets and the Leafs for like a Nazem Kadri. I think Kadri would be a great number 2 center in Winnipeg. He's got a very team-friendly contract. He's a proven 30-goal scorer in the past. He plays with grit, and I think he'd be a great fit to really help things move along there. But, of course, I can't guarantee that a deal like that could be made, but in a way it does kind of make sense. Oh, and if not Kadri, a player similar to that, they need somebody who can work with the salary cap situation, but yet work with their young wingers and really solidify that spot so that they don't have to be making trades every year at the deadline to get that position solidified. Now, of course, there is also hope that youngster Jack Roslovic could really step in and solidify that as well, but he's yet to really grab that spot and keep it for any period of time. He does have a lot of potential, and it's really unclear right now if that's a long-term option for them or not. Of course, trading Jacob Trouba might not be the only change to their back end. They also have pending unrestricted free agents Tyler Myers and Ben Sherratt. The right side would be a major blow to lose Trouba and Myers both. Of course, Sherratt's been a pretty good partner for Buffalo quite a bit, so that would be a big blow to this team. They do have some youngsters like Sammy Niku who can step in, maybe a Tucker Pullman as well, but they can't have too much youth back there. They have a lot of fairly young defensemen now between Trouba and Morrissey that played big roles for them. This D-corps could look very, very different next year, but they have some hard decisions to make. If they're going to trade Trouba, in my opinion, they really need to try to sign Myers and use that savings depending on what comes back here. So a lot of tough decisions in Winnipeg. It's hard to say if they can make all the moves to get back to the conference finals or further in 1 year. It may take a little bit longer here based on their salary cap crunch to make enough moves to make this team even better moving forward. It just really boils down to how they go about handling all these contracts. If you're Jets general manager Kevin Cheveldayoff, how would you go about handling this summer with all these players between your RFAs and your UFAs? You know where the weak spots are in the team. What moves do you make to make this team even better and try to be back to being a Stanley Cup contender as early as next year? If you're new to the channel, I hope you consider subscribing. We cover all 31 NHL teams, and there is plenty of content coming, especially in this series. Lots more teams to cover, so stay tuned for that. And give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it as well. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I will catch you next time.